Hello students. So in today's video I'm going to explain you the Great Stone Phase 1 part 3. Okay. So let's continue our chapter. So see here, Ernest had no teacher, but the Great Stone Face became one to him. When the work of the day was over, he would gaze at it for hours until he began to imagine that those vast features recognized him and gave him a smile of a kindness and encouragement. So here you know that Ernest has no teacher, but over the years he considered the great stone face as his teacher. Okay, and whenever his work was over, he would sit and stare at the stone face. Okay, for hours. And then later on, he started to imagine that this feature of the great stone face were actually giving him a smile and actually encouraging him kindly. You know, actually encouraging him kindly. Okay. Now, about this time, there went a rumor throughout the valley that the great man who was to bear or resemble to the great stone face had appeared at last. It seems that many years before, a young man had left the valley and settled at a distant seaport. Gathergold, which was his name, had set up as a shopkeeper and being sharp in business matter had become so very rich that it would have taken him 100 years only to count his wealth. In time he thought of his native valley and decided to go back there and end his days where he had been born. Okay, so what happened here? And about this time there was a rumor. Okay, and the rumor is in the valley that a great man who was supposed to bear resembles or similarities to the great stone face was appearing. The man who was arriving had left the valley long back and he had settled near the seaport, and the man's name was Githergold. Okay, and he had set a shop in the seaport. Okay, and started with his business. There he became very rich that it would have taken him 100 years to count his wealth which he had. And when he became old, he thought about his native valley where he was born, and he wanted to spend his days in this valley. Okay, now Ernest had been deeply stirred by the idea that the great man, the nobleman, the man of prophecy, after so many ages of delay, was at length to be seen in his native valley. While the boy was still gazing up the valley one day and imagining that the great stone face returned his gaze, okay, the noise of wheels was heard and a crowd of people cried, "Here comes the great Mr. Gather Gold." Okay, so when Ernest heard this man, Mr. Gathergold, was coming, who resembled the stone face, he became very emotional by this idea that at last a nobleman, or the man who is going to make this prophecy true, was coming in the valley after a long time, and he could see him this native valley at last. Okay, and while the Ernest was looking at this valley, there was a noise of the wheels which was heard, and a crowd of people gathered there, and everyone shouting, "Here comes the great Mr. Gathergold." Okay, so a carriage, a carriage drawn by 4 horses dashed round the turn of the road. Within it, thrust partly out of the window, appeared face of an old man with a yellow skin. Okay, the very image of the great stone face, shouted the people. Sure enough, the old prophecy is true. Here we have the great man at last. So there was a carriage, okay, which was drawn by 4 horses, and its turn on the road, and from within there was a face which pushed out of the window. which appeared out of the window. Okay, this face was of old Mr. Gathergold. People shouted that this face was exactly the image of the great stone face, and they were sure that now old prophecy became true. Okay, so and what greatly puzzled Ernest seemed actually to believe that here was the likeness which they spoke of. He turned away sadly from the wrinkled shrewdness of that unpleasant face and gazed up the valley, where the stone face seemed to say, "He will come, fear not, Ernest, the man will come." So here what happened? At last the great man has come. Okay. But when Ernest saw Mr. Gathergold's face, he was not very convinced. Okay. He did not see any likeness between the great stone and old and unpleasant face of Mr. Gathergold. Okay. So sadly he started to move away out of the gathering and just stand and gazed up the valley. Okay. Where it looks that spoke stone face said that, "Fear not, he will come. Ernest, the man will come who will make this prophecy true." Okay. So students, with this our first part of the great stone face finished. Okay. So I hope students you all understood. Thank you.